Hello once again, Ivan the Terrible here, and we're about to do a project for my new Asuka Model Sherman tank Firefly. The Asuka model from Japan was recommended to me by my good friend James Nigel, and he said that's Asuka has a few releases of the Sherman and is quite known to have a good reputation when it comes to accuracy and detail. So let's dive into the assembly of the Sherman tank, and after which I will do the bridge scratch building. Now the bridge was patterned after the Nijmegen bridge, but this is not exactly the Nijmegen bridge. I was just trying to refer to the trusses and supports, but eventually it was coined as the Bridge Diorama.
While the camera
To identify which ones are for the left wheels of the hull and from the right, I had to separate them with identifying it with the letter A and B. Although the Asuka model had the surface texture already for the turret, as a result of the casting, I still decided to use a surfacer to further enhance the casting texture, if that makes sense, just to make it more pop out. Now moving towards the scratch building of the structure and trusses of the bridge. Use the several pictures as reference, and using the 135 size of the Sherman tank model, I tried to do a little bit of measurements against it. Using several multimedia art materials, including the styrene plastic sheets, I am able to construct a mini representation of the trusses and the metal or steel structure of the bridge. As you know me, I construct and build and show you the overall concept. This is the pre-stages prior to painting, and basically gives me an idea of how the diorama will look like, including the layouts, how the subjects are placed, including the figures, and therefore I am able to make minor revisions or corrections along the way before painting. And once satisfied at this moment, I'm deconstructing the overall layout in preparation for the priming of the materials and the model kit. I don't know why I decided to do the black and white technique here, including pre-shading, because I will be using the OCD15, the olive drab version of the British, and I don't know if it's gonna show some of the pre-shades that I've done, but somehow it resulted to a satisfactory result. So then I decided to spray on a few highlights, lightly colored, of the olive drab OCD15 to make some of the edges pop out a little bit, and then move towards painting the tracks with dark brown red hull paint mixture. The decals for the Sherman Firefly, the Canadian Infantry support vehicle, was quite few. So it only provided me with the American Star, as well as the insignias, and identifying markers of the brigade. Oh, well, for weathering, I did not go the whole 9 yards. I wanted it to be as simple as possible. So I just did a few washes, dusting and application of the pigments. And that made the results far more acceptable in my case. And it was as simple as just weathering a few parts here and there. For the figures, aside from the tank crew, which were included in the Asuka model kit, I also bought two separate figures. One is from an aftermarket provider bought online, which depicted the two Canadian soldiers for that matter, walking along the side of the bridge. And then I had to buy separate figures for the surrendering German infantry. Now, a Sherman tank wouldn't be a Sherman tank without any additional provisions on the back placed by the infantry. So I decided to create on my own, scratch built one or a few using now the quick type of the Tamiya putty, and made a tarp and included some orange and apples and a reserve tank wheel just to make that provisions be added on the Sherman tank. Of course, before me putting on the scratch built tarp, I had to put on a plastic cover just to protect the surface of the model kit, because the Tamiya putty somehow almost always have some sticky parts being left. So to prevent that, I had to shield it with the cellophane. The tie downs were made from the typical yarn bought from the Arts Supply Center. And if you notice the thread, it has 3 strings tied together. So all I needed was the 1 string from the 3 of that. And that's supposed to be at par in terms of scale. Now, the trusses of the bridge were made again from several multimedia arts, but the major ones were styrene, as you can see here, and Sintra board. just to add on a bit tad of detail for the trusses of the bridge, I decided to use the detail of the bolts of the trusses, and these were made via the I don't know, the die, what's it called? I forgot the name. Punch die, yeah, the punch die cast set. So I'm able to come up with these small little bolts that should make up more or less the joining of the trusses or structure of the bridge. For the base, I decided to show off a little bit of the lower portion of the bridge. So if you can see the crosscut section showing you the additional trusses beneath the bridge, just to somehow add some visual effect or visual interest. This diorama also was part of the entry that I submitted during the Philippine Scale Model Show that I joined this year. And one of the few highlights that I want to share with you was that they do not allow any depiction of violence, gore, or any form of graphic image. So the dead SS soldier that I placed as a figure was allowed by the committee. As you know, during the market garden operation, when the Allies operated in this area, they were met by the Panzer 9, I think, Panzer 9 or 10 group. So a few wore SS uniforms and a few wore regular army units uniform.